To kick off this chapter, go ahead and go into your exercise folder and pick up a document called Mandala.ai. This thing right here. We're talking about layers. A lot of programs have layers. You've got Photoshop layers, you've got InDesign layers, you've got layers in Adobe Illustrator, as well as other programs. The one thing to remember is in Photoshop, I know we're not talking about Photoshop, but in Photoshop, they are totally indispensable because you're kind of working with paint on a canvas, and you get all these different invisible canvases to control the process. In InDesign and the program we're talking about, Adobe Illustrator, we're dealing with objects. So even though all of this stuff might actually be in one layer, and it could be, you still have control. So one of the primary purposes of layers, let me bring it up here so you can see it, is control. Being able to control stuff. Now you can see I have 4 layers, and this is just a little bit of a 101 on layers. We'll get into more detail in this chapter as it goes on. As you can see, I've got one called flowers, and guess what? The flowers are in that layer. I've got one called leaves. I've got one called pretties, my pretty, and backgrounds right here. So if I'm working on something, and maybe I want to work on the flowers, have you ever had that problem where you keep selecting the wrong thing? Now, there's a lot of ways we can get around that, but one way might be to go ahead and just turn off temporarily what we don't need, select that layer, and then begin working if that's the way you want to do it. You still need relationships though. Now I know the flowers are there and I can work with them, maybe even move them, but how do I know how they're moving in relationship to everything else? So if we turn everything back on again, well then maybe we have that problem where we think we're selecting the flower and we select something else, and I hate it when that happens. So one of the obvious things to do here is lock the layers that you're not working on to temporarily keep them out of harm's way. So we can click here, and here, and here, which is a toggle. Those layers are now locked, and I'm back to working on the flower. I can move it if I want to, put it exactly where I want it to be in relationship to everything else, and I have the other stuff locked so it's not going to interfere. So layers can help with organization. We can turn things on and off. We have ways to select and move things if we need to. Now there are 2 stacking orders going on here. There is a stacking order in the layer itself. Each layer, each object, these 4 objects right here. If I take one of these like here and move it over here, you can see this object in terms of stacking order is above this one. Let's turn these off for a second so you can see that. No, it's above it. That's the stacking order in that layer. Let me go ahead and undo that. I love undo. But you also have a stacking order with the layers themselves. So if I want, for whatever reason, I wouldn't want to do this, but if I want the backdrop at the top of the stacking order, I can grab it and drag it. You watch that little line appear? Wait till it gets to the top floor, everybody out. And of course I wouldn't do that because that kind of gets rid of everything. But you have a stacking order in the layers, and you have a stacking order in the layers panel itself too. 2 different ways that we can control what we see, because remember, if I put this thing sideways, things are at different levels. So the layers panel is designed primarily in an object-oriented program, in my opinion, to give me control of things that I'm working with. That's kind of the bottom line here. On to the next.